Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. We're very pleased to have with us this morning Delegate Dave LaRock from Loudon County. Welcome, sir.
Pleasure to be here, Woody. Thanks for having me in.
We were talking about all the changes here in terms of being in the Pocahontas building. Tell us a little bit about how you and your colleagues have adjusted to the new building.
Well, I'm glad to say that I'm not the only one that has to ask directions on a pretty regular basis. I asked a page on the way here how to find the stairwell, and but it is a bit like a maze, but we're adjusting. It takes a little bit of time.
So what's it going to be, about 4 years before the old General Assembly building is refurbished?
That's what they tell us, yeah. So
have your committee assignments changed at all?
Have not. Education, Transportation, Science, and Technology are the three committees I serve.
Now, I believe as a result of 15 new Democrats being elected to the General Assembly, that you are the sole Republican member from Loudon County now?
I hate to have to say yes to that, but that is the case. Yep, a couple of really good men are in exile, as we say now.
Now, have you had an opportunity to meet with and talk to your new colleagues from the county?
From the county would be David Reed and Wendy Gooditis. I've met those two, and I think Carrie Delaney has taken the seat that was formerly held by Jim Lamont. So I think most of them, if not all of them, yeah, and have trying to make it a point to get around to see them all, say hello, and just put a face with a name.
Now, I know there have been some changes adopted by the majority here in terms of enhanced transparency. Talk to us about those things. And I believe committee meetings are now covered, if you will, with cameras, so you have to be careful how you look.
Sure, yeah. Well, there's a couple of us that, like to break things up with a little humor now and then, just maybe a comment that wouldn't be necessarily the kind of thing that wouldn't be off color, but we just got to be a little more serious and be mindful that we're on the camera just like we are right now, open to the public. So it will keep a record for the general public to understand the discussions and dialogue. So I think it's a good thing.
Now, and I also understand that in subcommittee meetings now, there has to be a recorded vote on any legislation.
That's true, yeah. And again, that's a good transparency measure. So I think it'll serve the people well.
Talk to us a little bit about this problem in Washington that impacts the Commonwealth of Virginia and your district as well, in terms of the continued reliance, if you will, on the state of Virginia to the largesse of the federal government, if you will.
Well, I guess the duration of the shutdown is what you're generally referring to as a shutdown, and boy, don't try to take me too deep into that. I get drawn into this Richmond world down here and all the busyness of the General Assembly. I barely have time to say hi to my family when I get home on weekends and then get prepped for coming back down here. But certainly it is very, very important. I've talked to a couple of federal workers who kind of don't know what to make of it. I heard some comments on the way home on Friday, and it is kind of fascinating that this DACA, which is pretty widely acknowledged as an initiative that involves people who are not citizens of the United States, would rise to the level of importance that it would be the bargaining chip that the Democrats think is worth shutting down the federal government for rather amazing to me. The people in the interview that I heard didn't want to admit that is what they were willing to do, and I hear that they're starting to add a few other things to the Christmas tree because that will kind of give them some cover as to what the hard negotiating points are to kind of maybe make that less obvious. But at any rate, it is important, and we hope that they get in that room, make the compromises that are necessary, and get things back on track.
So I take it you do have some constituents who are federal employees who commute into Washington, and I assume that there are federal contractors in your district who do the same thing.
I'm sure there are, yeah. I don't think they necessarily look to their state delegate to vent their concerns on that, although it probably would make for some interesting conversations.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about transportation, because I know you and Senator Black have some legislation dealing with the new tolling on I-66 inside the Beltway. Now, I take it that took effect December 4th. What was the situation before December 4th, and what has it become, and why are your constituents and you really outraged about what happened after December 4th?
Sure. Well, December 4th is when the new tolling of I-66 inside the Beltway kicked in. So if we broaden out beyond that and look at the cost of the ride to work for people who live in Loudon County, which is about 65% of the district that I serve, Senator Black covers roughly the same territory in Loudon, or actually quite a bit more than I do. These people are paying Greenway toll, which is I think it's about $5.50, and they dump onto the Dulles Toll Road, which is about $3.50. And then the new gift, compliments of the initiative put forward by former Governor McAuliffe, they can add to that toll bill anywhere from $1 or $2 to travel the distance up to the astronomical numbers that we've heard of north of $40 each way, which is just hard to imagine that anybody in their right mind would think that that's a reasonable amount of money for any person to pay per day in tolls, or per week, per month. It adds up to a comment by Tim Hugo, I think, kind of captures it. You have to get a second job to pay your tolls to get to your first job, but it shouldn't be that way. I like to contrast that to Hampton Roads, where they're building some tunnels, and they were getting ready to put some tolls in place there. And Governor McAuliffe in 2014 stepped in, started out using $82 million in transportation maintenance funding to put a buy down in place there. Because in paraphrasing his words, that tolls approaching $2 peak time would have too much of an impact on people, families, businesses. And I think that the total bill for that buy down ended up being around $300 million. So a complete double standard there. The people from the district that I serve would be paying easily north of $40 to use that corridor. Now, they can spill off onto other routes. That has effects on those routes, makes them more congested, and can upset people's schedules. They have to allow more time to get to work. So it's a very, very difficult situation, and so we've proposed some things that would put a cap on the tolls in the form of a refund above an amount that would be about $5 each way, $200 a month. And we have sought to lower the speed, which should increase the volume and help lower the tolls, change the time bracket back to the original time, which was pre-December 4th, just so that it doesn't have such a profound impact on people's schedules. And toll reverse commuters, because the revenue stream from the tolling is going to improvements in the corridor. And the original proposal was to toll commuters, which is eastbound in the morning, west in the afternoon, and likewise in the other lanes. That provision was pared down from tolling both directions to only eastbound in the morning and west in the afternoon, which is a complete inequity. No consideration for the fact that everybody using the road, if you're going to toll it to make improvements, it ought to be everybody using the road. So we've asked for that to be changed. And then the new thing that I think is very interesting is the Dulles Access Highway. So if you're on this busy corridor in the morning, Dulles Toll Road, and you look to the middle, or the evening for that matter, you see 4 lanes that are marginally used, just barely used, and that's this 4-lane that goes back and forth from the Beltway to the airport. We think that that should be better utilized. That's owned by the federal government. So we'll ask Congress to jump in with us and perhaps turn that into hot lanes and help relieve the traffic on Dulles Toll Road and create a new revenue stream to lower the tolls on the Dulles Toll Road. So ultimately, all of this package is under the umbrella of providing toll relief for the people in that part of Virginia who need it desperately.
So I assume that your bill has been assigned to the Transportation Committee?
I don't think it's been assigned to a committee, but that's a pretty good guess. That's where it'll end up, yeah.
Talk to us about Metro funding, which has been in the news over the past few years, given the problems that Metro has had. I know their revenues have dropped significantly in terms of those who pay those ridership fees, if you will. It still doesn't have a dedicated source of revenue, so what's going on there?
Well, in the amount of time we have, Woody, we could barely scratch the surface, but you've touched on a couple of the important things. Without a dedicated revenue stream, and even the physical design of the track makes maintenance of it very difficult because you always have trains going east and west. Some systems have a 3rd lane so that you can always be working on them. Paul Wiedefield is in the building this afternoon. He's going to meet with the Northern Virginia delegation and some transportation finance.
Now, who is he?
He's the new general manager, CEO of the Metro system. He's doing a real good job. He's a turnaround man to come in and take the impossible job of bringing that back into good shape. And I think he's really committed to doing that, but obviously money enters into the picture. It's a very, very costly system to maintain. It's roughly 40 years old, and very little long-term maintenance has been done to the system over time. So there's a lot of obsolescence that's taken place over those years. The part of the reason we've gotten to this point, I think, is there are things that are baked into the WMATA Compact. That's the governing document that Virginia, Maryland, and the district have agreed to. Congress approved that. And until we are willing to crack that open and get some consensus around reforming labor, the laws governing labor, I find it really hard to believe that there's going to be the ability for Paul, even in his making his best efforts, to really make that system and bring it into better condition financially. There's also the WMATA board. That's a governing body that is too big and is somewhat dysfunctional. Ray LaHood was brought in, made some recommendations to reduce that board. In fact, he's proposed a 5-member board to propose reforms. So they have requested significant funding. Meaning the Metro folks. I serve on the NVTC, which is the body that is appointed to a combination of local and state leaders to manage the transit in the state. And so there's a lot of talk there. I take exception to a study that they've put forward to try to establish the value of the Metro system. I've shown it to a transportation economist, and he just kind of shook his head and had a grin that that study, if you want to call it that, is kind of inflates the value of the system. So it is an important system, but I want to make sure that we're making our appropriations decision based on good information, and that as a precondition for significant increases in funding, we have significant reforms accompanying. It's just a business decision. Unfortunately, sometimes government doesn't function in an entirely business-like fashion, but I'm going to be doing my best to make sure that we make some long-term changes so that the money is sent there as a good investment.
Where are we in terms of Metro to the airport, Dulles?
You know, that's a good question, and at one point I could have given you the absolute to the minute up to date, but I think that is somewhere around 2020 would be the completion of the Silver Line out into Loudon County. But I believe that they've since the commitment was made in 2012, I guess, the projected completion date has moved out considerably, and the costs have gone up. Which
sure.
Is kind of
I think at one time the cost was like $7 billion. I assume it's even more now.
Yeah, those numbers get thrown around a lot.
Right.
I think it's I focused on the Loudon share of it,
Right.
which was, I think, somewhere around 2.5 billion generally, but that varies.
So the Greenway is part of this package, so to speak, that you and Senator Black are looking at. What's been happening with that over the years? I know people have complained about high tolls there as well.
Yeah. Well, again, one corridor starts, if you're coming from the west, it starts with the Greenway. That's a privately owned road.
Okay.
And so that was built, when I first moved to Virginia over about 30 plus years ago, I remember over the course of years, there was an effort to acquire this massive strip of right-of-way across private property. And it is fascinating because it is probably hundreds of yards wide. And that is what the Greenway is built on, connecting Leesburg to the western end of the Dulles Toll Road down by Dulles Airport. No eminent domain was used in that entire acquisition, so it was a private endeavor. And interesting history, but I don't think I've seen any proposals put forward that would change that from being a privately owned road, with rate increases being approved by the State Corporation Commission.
Okay.
But the people of Virginia built the Dulles Toll Road, which is from the airport going in, and that is operated under an agreement that, well, I think we'll be bringing forward information to show that the terms that obligate MWA, which is the airport's authority, to maintain and operate that road are something we should be taking a close look at, because that would be partly how we would leverage this different utilization of the roads within that corridor from the airport east.
Now, how has your legislation been received so far? I assume you have spoken with a number of your colleagues about it. What are the chances of success at this point, do you think?
Well, speaking of the toll initiative,
yes.
I'm optimistic that some or all of those will go forward. The last two, well, number 5 on the list, it would be to actually instruct out the airport's authority to make the Dulles Toll Road a free road, as it was promised to the people of Virginia, and Northern Virginia especially, to be, once it was paid for. Well, we've crossed that mark. But the government hates to give up a good revenue stream, so they turned it over. That's going to take the cooperation of Congress. I'll be looking to our congressional representatives to help us with that piece. But in a meeting where one of the deputy secretaries, I'll probably stop short of the name, but made reference to some of the asks in that, and I think, although it was no official position, I sensed a willingness to take those pretty seriously. So I would say we'll get at least some of those, some of that relief in place, but we're going to not give up easy.
Speaking of the Secretary of Transportation here, I think there is a new one who happened to be at one time a member of the House of Delegates.
Yeah.
Shannon Valentine from Lynchburg, I believe so. Hopefully there will be some help there, and she obviously understands the legislative process.
Yeah. Yeah, I met her at a function, and she said, "Hello, I'm Sharon Valentine." And I said, "Why do I feel like I should remember that name?" And she said, "Well, I'm the Secretary of Transportation." And that was a good answer. That's why I should have remembered it. Yeah, I think particularly the moving out to the western part of the district is 81, and given Lynchburg is on that road, we'll no doubt have an ear when it comes to venting our needs for improvements to 81. A little bit tougher because that's federally funded road, but we're going to have to get that moved up to the top of the priority list as well, and we're counting on her to be part of that effort.
Now, from your perspective, how has the legislation passed back in 2013 in terms of additional funding for transportation within the Commonwealth worked out?
It's worked very well. Now, I want to be honest. I ran against the gentleman who previously held this seat, objecting to that, and I think if I had it to do over, I still would, based on the notion that people are taxed and tolled enough already, and government needs to refine and improve on its efficiency. But with that said, it is generating lots and lots of billions of dollars worth of revenue that is managed by the NVTA, and it's leading to significant improvements in roads. as you probably know, the governor proposed making that money, committing 1/3 of it to transit, which I think was a horrible idea. The system's working just fine now. So I messaged out to the people of Loudon in an op-ed saying, look, these are 10 priority projects. And when you start talking about road projects that, I'll give you one, for example, Route 15 north of Leesburg, it is just, it is horrible. I mean, people's property values are affected by it. It's so bad. You couldn't even begin to think about getting emergency services vehicles in and out when it's bottled up. That's a priority project. And so the op-ed made it clear that if the governor's proposal goes forward, just cross 1/3 of Loudoun County's priorities off that list. We also have a budget amendment in that I think is very simple and appropriate, and that is that would limit the amount of monies that are spent in Northern Virginia through this and VTA, the 2013 monies, 2313 bill passed in 2013, would cap transit monies at 25% overall. Right now, it's just way too much money going to transit when only at best 1/10 of the people in that region use the transit. So it wants to consume a vastly disproportionate amount of money given the amount of use.
Now, you also have a resolution dealing with a constitutional amendment, I believe, to ensure that transportation funds are used for transportation. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, well, isn't that kind of a novel idea? I'm being a little sarcastic there, forgive me, but in the past there have been some governors who have sought to repurpose, even though I'll admit temporarily, they'll shift a couple $100 million here, a couple $100 million there, from the designated transportation funding pots of money, we'll say, for other uses. And again, all those monies have been replenished back into transportation funds. It really disrupts the planning process of moving, big project and big planning forward. And in states where these limits have been placed on how this money could be moved from from transportation into general and back, you realize a lot of benefits to that. So that's really fascinating to think that an initiative that I put forward could amend something as revered as the Virginia Constitution, but it is a practical, business-like approach to transportation spending. So it simply says that if it's appropriated for transportation, then it's put in this, figuratively speaking, a lockbox, and only can be moved out of that with a 2/3 vote of the General Assembly. And again, very well received by organizations like AAA. The chambers are very supportive of it, and the people that are involved in building roads. If you know a road project is coming and funded, a big contractor can kind of gear up to perhaps be in a position to build that road. And I'm told that this lockbox will ultimately not only streamline planning and bring projects forward more quickly, but it'll save taxpayer dollars. So that has been, to amend the Constitution, it takes 2 votes of the legislature. First positive affirmative vote was last year. It'll be voted on again this year. We'll also have a bill that puts the wording that would appear on a referendum next year if it's voted on favorably this year. So when people go to vote next November, we may have some wording in there that hopefully makes it clear what a lockbox is, and that they would choose to move that forward.
Now, I understand that there's a criteria used to determine who's going to get transportation funding, when and where. Mitigation of congestion is one of those. There's several others, aren't they?
Yeah, we've actually tried to keep track of that, because a formula that is used to prioritize is only as good as the weight of the ratio of the different components. So in Northern Virginia, we actually, under this House Bill 2, which turned into 2313, local areas, regions chose their priority. So Northern Virginia, congestion and congestion relief, that's the big priority. Safety would be another one. And
economic development, I think, maybe.
Yeah, so as you go into the other parts of the Commonwealth, such as Southwest, where they look at new roads as an economic development tool, they would prioritize that, and the ratio would be different down there. But it's really a sensible, analytical way of approaching transportation funding, which replaced kind of what I call the good old boy system.
Right.
You know, money tended to go to the districts of those who had the most seniority and the most pull, and that doesn't serve the Commonwealth overall.
To what extent is return on investment looked at as well?
Well, that would be perhaps more relevant to the discussion of the economic aspect of it. But return on investment in transportation terms, yes, in Northern Virginia, meaning how many people will it get home more quickly, waste time spent idling in traffic. That's the return on the investment for congestion relief dollars.
Now, besides the problems at I-66, how has the transurban hot lanes worked out on I-95?
I got to confess, Woody, I don't head west very often. I go to an NVTC meeting in Arlington in the evening, and I'm going reverse commuting there.
Right.
But I understand that they're successful, but as far as the congestion relief value, you probably know more about that than I do.
This is true.
So,
this is true. It's fairly congested, and it can become very expensive as well.
Yeah.
So.
But the notion of having private companies come in and create new alternatives, meaning new lane capacity, I think it's a great idea.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about our schools, because you're on the education committee as well. I know we were talking earlier about a school district of innovation.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept, and that was this is a continuation of an initiative that former Delegate Tag Greason put into motion, recognizing that. I think it'd be accurate to say that just all school districts aren't the same, and if they want, so the bill that he passed defined a school district of innovation. Loudon County, which is where I live, has said they would like to apply for that status, and as part of that application, they would be exempt from SOL testing in 3 different categories, and please don't ask me to name them.
No, I understand.
But in replacing them with assessments that would monitor the progress of the students in those schools, and to make sure that they were performing at a level equal to or above the SOL assessment, where they would be if they were using the SOL testing. So that bill's before a subcommittee. Our superintendent is coming down to be part of the testimony in favor of that, and I think overall it is to some degree a movement toward creating another option that would potentially replace the SOLs, and I don't think that's going to break a lot of people's hearts. Granted, the accountability is important, and that was the purpose of SOL in the first place, so we'll see how this goes, and perhaps we'll have something to compare it to going forward if we pass this.
Great. Well, we appreciate your time. Good luck in the rest of the time you spend here in 2018. I hope to see you again soon.
Sounds
Delegate
good.
Dave LaRock.
Thanks again for having me, Woody.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.